Good morning. Today I'm going to take you back to 1998, and in 1998 two films came out, released within 6 weeks of each other. Both were animated films about insects, more specifically ants, and both seemed suspiciously similar. Now, back in 1994 at Pixar, John Lasseter and the animation studio's story team were considering a story based on insects as, well, back then it seemed like the next achievable goal in computer animation. Now, Toy Story, one of the helpful things about Toy Story being based on toys is that you don't have to photorealistically render skin in fine detail. If you're rendering toys, the toys are a lot simpler surfaces. The normals and reflections in 3D rendering are much easier to achieve. Now, they thought, well, insects which have exoskeletons, which are hard, that could make the animation somewhat easier as well, as there's less flexure and fewer complex soft surfaces. So from animating models of toys, or computer models of toys, they thought, well, insects are probably more difficult but achievable. Walt Disney, meanwhile, Walt Disney Feature Animation were considering making a film in the late 80s, in fact this is a long time before, late 80s, called Army Ants, in which a single ant was a pacifist and an independent thinker among a military colony of highly driven ants. But that film never became a reality. So they had the idea and proposal for this film called Army Ants back in the late 80s. Later, when Jeffrey Katzenberg was chairman of Disney's film division, he left the company in a disagreement with CEO Michael Eisner. Katzenberg would go to DreamWorks, and many of the projects he suggested at DreamWorks were ones that he had suggested while at Disney, including Army Ants. At DreamWorks, Woody Allen was cast in the voice role of the character Zed, who is an ant. Woody Allen uses his predictably characteristic humour in this characterisation quite well. John Lasseter and Pixar were soon to realise that DreamWorks were also working on an ant film, which was the one that was to be called Antz. Pixar's project was to be called Bugs. Both feature an ant who stands out from the colony by being individualistic. A Bug's Life was a complex animation task for rendering computers of the day. Their first test sequence was to animate and render the circus sequence because they thought, well, that's less likely to change. Also, compared to their previous work, Toy Story, A Bug's Life had a lot more storylines and many groups of characters, all of which required storytelling, whereas Toy Story was fairly linear and monolithic story-wise. They also tried to make the ants appear likeable, which was a problem when they studied actual ants. So they emitted, in A Bug's Life, they emitted the mandibles of a normal ant and changed the body plan from 6 legs to upright with 2 arms and 2 legs. And the grasshoppers were made to look more evil by adding a pair of limbs that they really shouldn't have. The animation could not control scenes with crowds of 400 to 800 ants individually, but, because they couldn't remain static for even a moment without looking odd or dead. So what they came up with was about 8 individual universal ants. They called these universal ants, and these were autonomous. So they would be moving of their own volition, the program running them. And given about 5 groups of these 8 universal ants randomly distributed through the set, it appears as though that there's enough complex motion and action to get away with. Further, giving them slightly different colours and heights and weights added to the apparent difference among the distributed universal ants. Subsurface scattering was also used to render surfaces. Now, this is something that you would now try doing in a much more complex way, to the subsurface scattering of normals, which is the calculated radiosity to simulate a reflection, like in ray tracing. You simulate the reflection by giving a calculated emission of light, the radiosity of light, which simulates the reflection off a surface, and that's called a normal, depending on the angle. And so the subsurface scattering was also used in those days, which was quite a leading edge thing for them, to render surfaces. In the end, ants appealed more to older audiences, whereas A Bug's Life was much more family friendly. Antz was in effect a Woody Allen film. And as a result, it's a lot funnier and the lead character is a lot more sophisticated. On the other hand, A Bug's Life has more advanced and sophisticated animation. Antz tries to adhere somewhat more realistically to the anatomy of a real ant, and it was also rushed through production. It shows as being simpler and less lavish visually. Antz only features a few different species of insect. A Bug's Life is full of varied and diverse insect forms. Antz also illustrates a class system at work, and it offers a deeper view of the complexities of life and death. So, Antz versus A Bug's Life, both 1998, both Antz animations. Have a good Friday and have a very good weekend, everyone. Thank you very much. Goodbye. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you do indeed like this. Have a good